like rock and roll? Okay. How many of you are going to the water conference, the rest of the conference? Well, let's do it the other way. How many of you are not? Okay, all right. Because I wanted to give you something if you're not going to this conference. You're going to get it over. So, okay. All right. Well, I am happy to introduce Henry Stevens. He's with the city of Portland. And Portland has a lot of experience in working with green infrastructure, low impact development. And I'm going to keep the introduction short because you're here to listen to him and not me. But we would like to give you a hearty welcome to Iowa, and we're looking forward to your presentation. And I think the presentation is such, I think we can learn a lot from questions and answers too. So as Henry is going through this presentation, if you have questions, ask him questions. We'll have time for Q&A a little bit later too. So welcome to Iowa.
Thanks, Pat. Well, thanks very much. It's great to be here. I've never been to Iowa before. Nice weather, and as it turns out, it's great to reacquaint myself with winter. We haven't had a winter in Portland. We're having a major drought as far as snow in the mountains. I guess we're going to get lumped in with California this year, and it's been really mild. The daffodils have been up for, I think, 3 weeks in Portland, so this is a great bracing thing. The other thing is my daughter is at school in Minnesota for the first time, so
Okay.
Great to be in the Midwest. So I'm just a project manager, okay? I'm a staff level PM, but I've worked on these green projects. We've sometimes called them sustainable stormwater projects. We call them green systems is what we call them often when we're talking about gray systems as well. And of course, more recently, I think everybody's talking about green infrastructure. So happy to, I'm trying to cover soup to nuts. Pat requested a really broad presentation about what we do, so that's what you're getting. And I really like to have questions. I just can't stand the thought of myself sitting up here pontificating for an hour and a half. I'm just not used to it. So Portland, just to give you some, give you your bearings anyway. We're about 600,000. The city has grown really rapidly. It's actually changed quite a bit. I grew up there, and it's a lot more people, a lot denser, and a lot more stormwater management issues, I suppose. This picture will give you a little bit of a sense. This is the downtown core on the west side of the Willamette River here, which runs north up to the Columbia. This is the inner east side, industrial district, and then you'll see residential areas behind it. So this is to the east towards Mount Hood. These are the Tualatin Hills up here, which bound the west side. Portland's 600,000 people, but it's actually part of a big metro area these days. It's over 2 million people in the metro area. So Beaverton is behind the hill there. I wanted to just mention that in terms of green stormwater management, our soils really vary quite a bit. Of course, the hills here are steep. We don't do a lot of infiltration. The soils there are silts, but they're wind-blown silt. I guess you guys have that. They're quite fine, and they don't infiltrate very well. On the other hand, on the east side here, the soils, they're also silty, but they were deposited by floods that came through, and they drain at 1 to 2 inches per hour, and we've had a lot of success doing infiltration in various different kinds of facilities. So a common theme here, I think, for anybody who's starting to do this kind of stuff, or if you're already doing it, is learning by testing different ideas. I just wanted to start by saying we've done a lot of this stuff, but a lot of it, we've learned a lot by trial and error. And I suspect it's the same for anybody who's doing this stuff, depending on what conditions are like where you live, what the soils are like, what the slopes are like, rainfall patterns, all that kind of stuff. So just I'm going to provide some background, but I just want to give you a heads up of the kinds of technologies or approaches I'm going to talk about that fit under the green infrastructure heading. So there's you can read that yourself on the top. They all have those common features. I'm going to talk a bit about green roofs. And then we have plenty of those. We've had the Eco Roof program we'll talk a little bit about. This is a typical Green Street project here. But I work on a lot of these where we're actually putting bump outs into the street, but there are a lot of different versions of those. And this one is probably an infiltration system. Then we have natural areas here that we also consider green infrastructure. This is a stormwater planter on the south side of a school that we did to protect residents from sewer backups in a sewer backup area. Then we have tree planting and another natural area here. So that's kind of the range of so-called green infrastructure that I wanted to talk about today. Perhaps it's the same for you guys. We talk about green infrastructure partly because we're talking a whole lot more about asset management these days. I think everybody's talking about asset management, and in order to be more transparent with the public, we're listing our assets more. For a long time, we've talked about asset management in terms of our infrastructure, our gray infrastructure at the city, but now we're also bringing green infrastructure into our databases, tracking so-called maintenance needs, performance, and that is a work in progress, but we're doing all that. And again, we're trying to be a lot more transparent with the public. We've been under, the city of Portland, we've been under a whole lot of scrutiny the last couple of years, and there have been some lawsuits that have really forced us to be more clear with the public about what we've got and what we're doing. So, let's see. I guess we're a big system. We have 2 wastewater treatment plants, 1,000 miles of sanitary sewer. I should say we have, so one thing that's distinctive, we have a whole lot of sumps. We have a huge underground injection permit for in the ground. These are 30-foot vaults in the middle of streets on the east side where the soils drain well, and we have flood deposits. We have a lot of these injection systems. We've been doing that for years. We're actually very lucky that we can do that. It's a very inexpensive way to dispose of stormwater runoff. We've got a lot of pump stations, force main manholes. You'll see Taylor and Charlie, and new to the list, we have a whole lot of green infrastructure. We currently have about 1,500 green streets. I showed you in the last picture a single green street facility. We have 1,500 of those and other stormwater facilities. So, yeah. So the list of why manage or why use green infrastructure, I think everybody's probably aware. Basically, we're using green infrastructure in the city of Portland to manage stormwater runoff, but there's a lot of other benefits that come with it that we point to all the time. So there's been a movement to manage stormwater at the source, to mimic natural hydrology. This is a big component, integrating it into the built environment. So there's a lot of design work trying to incorporate these things as attractive areas in the urban environment. And then all the multiple benefits that kind of go on and on these days. People talk even about sequestering carbon, reducing urban temperatures, or reducing the urban heat island. Aesthetics. I mean, you can see some sort of the fancier type of thing here. These are green roofs, and these are garden planters. And then this is a public plaza that has a stormwater capture and infiltration, probably a rain garden is what this is. So I'm a nuts and bolts guy, and I work on a lot of the enduring issues for these. I don't just see the aesthetics and the nice greenery. I work on maintenance issues, and I'm going to talk about those as well. I see these mostly as functional systems when I look at them, but I work with a lot of landscape architects who've been key to incorporating these things, particularly into the most urban parts of the environment. I don't think we're going to save the world with these things, but I think that they are attractive and useful in a way. Let's see. Yeah. Should I just do a page down?
Well, what if you do is page down and I'll switch out batteries.
Oh, okay.
That maybe it's better.
Let's see, it's not doing that either.
This is fireworks.
No.
I think you switch between your PowerPoint to your desktop. All of it will show up.
Okay. Thanks. I don't know what you did. What I did. Okay, so all the multiple benefits, again, there's a whole lot of good reasons to do it, and I think many of these things apply in different cases in different ways. Again, a ton of environmental value in addition to economic value. As you'll see, we've used these a lot in Portland to benefit the pipe system, the sewer collection system. To extend the life of that collection system by protecting it from storm surges and avoid having to dig up pipe system that otherwise wouldn't have to be replaced, again, by managing the volume going into it. So, more background. I showed you a photo of this downtown area right in here. Here is the Willamette River running north up to the Columbia River, which is our big river. And so this is the part over here that has soils that, there are hills here, and the soils don't drain quite as well as the soils over here, which are all flood deposits. And these are our watersheds. There are lots of creeks in the western hills here. There are creeks in this area. This is pretty much dry, and it's all served by a combined sewer system that combines both runoff and sewage.
So are you under consent order to separate the sewers, or are you using green infrastructure to deal with it?
Well, I'll talk about it. We're actually we just finished a 20-year combined sewer program. And we did some separation, and we put in more of those stormwater sumps. I was say the sumps are mostly out here where we have these flood deposits. Okay, and we separated some areas out here on the peninsula, but separating was so darn expensive that we didn't do a lot of it.
What's the impetus for infrastructure in Portland? Is it because of the combined sewers, or is it because of the original NPDES permit, or is it just public's interest?
Yeah, I'll weave some more into it. But the basic answer is that although we've gotten a start on it, there have been some big property owners who realized some years ago, and we worked with them, that if they put in swales, say, along their building to manage runoff, it was going to be less expensive than putting in a whole pipe network on sort of a campus. We've gotten going on some projects like that, but then more than 20 years ago, the CSO thing took off. There was a lawsuit, and the city of Portland was required to develop a CSO program. It was $1.4 billion, and it became clear that we weren't going to be able to build enough new pipe or expand our existing pipe enough to manage all the runoff to meet the CSO requirements. We were desperate for other ways to manage runoff, so we put in more of those sumps. We disconnected residential downspouts into the yards, and we imposed more stringent on-site stormwater management requirements for new development and redevelopment. So I guess the answer is the CSO, Combined Sewer Overflow Program. We're seeing the same thing in other cities. We were kind of an early goer on the CSO requirements, and we're seeing other big cities who are doing the same thing now. Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., they're desperate for capacity, desperate to get stormwater out of their sewer system. So we do a lot of related work in watershed areas with separate systems, but really the CSO program is what launched us on this. So I'm mixing stuff here. Sorry, this is from somebody who did a presentation in Europe, so I got some millimeters and 37 inches. I guess, so we get about 37 inches of rain in a year, and it's not a lot, right? We're famous for gray skies, but we get a lot of low intensity rain. And then I think most importantly is we have quite a summer dry period, and that is one of the biggest challenges for our green infrastructure as far as watering requirements. We generally build these systems not to require water, but for instance, last summer we could get 2 months without rain. Even though we're famous for gray skies, it can be 2 months and average temperatures in the 80s and 90s during the day. And that can be really hard on green roofs. It doesn't kill them, but it can change plant assemblies that are on there. And the soils that we put into our typical infiltration systems is pretty sandy. We typically import about 18 inches of media, and it can be quite sandy. And anyway, watering is a kind of an issue. So, sorry about that. More millimeters, but we get a lot of really small storm events, okay? It's low intensity events, in the, mostly in the winter. So, and you guys have crazy big storms, right? I can't imagine what your version of this looks like.
We can't have intense storms, but we have about 32 inches of rain annually, and it varies. We don't get a lot of the teeny tiny storms, but we have a water quality line of 1.25 inches. That's what we try to manage. That's 90% of the rainfall events, 1.25 inches.
Right, and our water quality is 0.84, I think, so. So we don't get a whole lot of snow, 8 centimeters a year. So I think I kind of went through this before. We have 2 treatment plants, 100 pump stations. 42% of the city is served by this old combined sewer system that just has gotten a big upgrade. Operating budget, almost $900 million a year. And I'm one of more than 500 employees. Just to give you a sense of how big the utility is. We're a drainage utility, but like other similar utilities, we really push the boundaries. And in fact, as I mentioned, there's been a lawsuit about the scope of our services because the original city charter, which hasn't changed, just refers to us as a drainage utility that handles runoff and sewage. And obviously our scope has changed quite a bit. List of the regulations that we're under. I assume most of these are familiar to you guys. Talked about the combined sewer. Of course, we have an MS4 permit. We have an Endangered Species Act, actually applies within the city of Portland. We have endangered salmon that pass through the city. UIC, we have waterhead protection areas, and then we have a list of other local and state things. These are our watershed health goals. I'm going to move along. I have a lot of slides. So in terms of the history of how this all got going, I was talking about some early big projects. This is one of them where it was just cheaper to put in swales than it was to put in a whole pipe system at a big public venue. 91 is when the first legal action came in about the CSO program. Downspout Disconnection, I worked on this program. We worked at over 25,000 houses and disconnected over 50,000 downspouts. It was one of the most cost-effective parts of this combined sewer overflow program, getting stormwater out of the sewer system. 99 was a significant year for our stormwater management manual because it became much more stringent as far as requiring on-site stormwater management and requiring people to use green stormwater management systems to the extent practical. Here's our first commercial eco-roof in 99. We were planned. In 2002, we actually funded, with operating funds, we actually funded 10 private property retrofit programs. We recruited these projects. We actually put out money. We advertised it. We gave people money for managing a certain amount of runoff. I could describe the criteria. Kind of put our money where our mouth was and to learn a lot more about what it would take to do stormwater retrofits, because we talked about it for quite a while. As part of the CSO program, we couldn't just rely on new and redevelopment to get stormwater out of the system. We actually had to work with property owners to retrofit their properties, which is, of course, is the most complex, expensive way to do it, to get stormwater management. This is, I'll talk a little more about it. This was our first Green Street project in 2003. So just 12 years ago, and of course we have over 1,500 of these things now. That's just one version. Stormwater Management Plan 2005. Clean River Rewards, just to talk briefly, we actually have a rate reduction you can get if you manage stormwater on your property. You can get out of 1/3 of the bill, and as you'll see, we have a pretty high bill if you manage all of your runoff on site. That applies to everybody. And so 2006 is when that all started. I'll talk more about the Tabor to the River program. And Gray to Green was really a political push by the mayor of the time who was really interested in this stuff and gave a burst of funding, 5 years of funding for a number of green infrastructure programs. So it was a limited period. These were all programs that were already up and running, and then the mayor got extra funding for all this stuff and just moved it along. There's the combined sewer. You can see, as I said, it covers about 40% of our service area. Just to give you a sense, it's colossal, it's huge. We have, I think this is the biggest pipe. I got to go down in this one time because I won the lottery. It's a 22-foot diameter pipe, and just to give you a sense, the initial modeling showed that this, our biggest pipe, was going to have to be 27 feet in diameter, but it turned out to be too big to get it through the underpinnings of the interstate bridge. And it was also going to break the bank. It was just going to be too expensive. We couldn't afford it. And so green infrastructure was part of the solution for that, to make that pipe smaller. So this isn't supposed to be about sewer rates, but I just wanted to acknowledge we're now in the top tier for sewer rates in the country. I think one of the lessons is if you're going to raise rates, start early. This is when the CSO legal action first started taking place, and our financial group understood right away that we had to really start raising rates right away. And you can see, so this is the combined sewer and stormwater utility rates here are up close to $60 per month per household. So that rocks. And the good news for us, because we've been, I mean, it's really hard on everybody, and we're very aware of that. We're just happy that there are other cities that are going to pass us on this, because we're really out there, and again, there have been some lawsuits. And I'd say something close to a ratepayers' rebellion, although it didn't quite happen that way. So I'm going to talk about one of our projects where we use gray and green. This is the outline of the sewer basin. There are these big combined sewer pipes that run up both sides of the river and catch all the runoff that comes into them. So we did a pre-design before 2006, and actually it was all pipe upgrades. It was just pipe work, and it was before the advent of green infrastructure. And instead of just replacing the pipes, which was going to be more expensive, we did a whole bunch of other stuff. We looked at doing more green roofs, green streets. Of course, we replaced some pipe because some of it was in poor condition, or just had to be enlarged, the trunk lines. So we did both gray and green. So in that area, I think it's taking place in phases over about 10 years, but we've done about 500 green streets, replaced a whole lot of pipe. We planted, sorry, this is European again, it's 3,500 green streets went in. We have a private property retrofit group that goes into target areas where it's less expensive to work with the property owners and actually manage runoff from their parking lot, let's say, than to replace the pipe in the street. Done some of that. We've done some invasive removal, native planting, and then worked with the public on outreach and education in the parks and such. So it was really what we call an integrated approach. It was not just about the pipes, but about the green infrastructure in people's neighborhoods. And again, there was a lot of political support for this. It's not something we would have done, say, 10 years before this. Here's the cost savings associated with mixing the green in with the gray that we had to do. Significant. Okay, so here comes the eye candy. We talked about the art of stormwater, of green infrastructure. And so, again, I'm a nuts and bolts guy, but I'm going to show you a whole bunch of pictures to give you a sense of all the different forms that this stuff comes in. And I think before I start, it's important to talk about landscape design and architecture. my work group, we have done a lot of the prototype projects over the years, the first projects, and helped work out some of the standard designs that were incorporated across the Bureau. So there's a much bigger group of engineers that work on these systems across our Bureau. But we have we have 3 landscape architects in our group, and they've been absolutely essential to all the work that we do. I'm going to show you a mixture of public and private facilities. Some of them were designed by us. For instance, these green roofs are mostly private. But I don't know, do you guys have many green roofs? Have you guys experimented with them?
Yes, actually, for Iowa, we have probably about 10 or 12, if not more than that. Yeah, maybe 15. Yeah.
Great. So I haven't worked on these kinds of projects, but they're great as far as stormwater management. I think it's interesting because we don't have much in the way of specifications for them, and we're trying to develop them to establish a minimum stormwater management. Will the roof hold 1 inch of water or 2 inches? Because we have a lot of proprietary material going in. We've done some monitoring, and I'll talk about it. We know that they work really well against the peaks of storms. But I'm hoping someday there will actually be a standard and say you have to meet a minimum when you build the roof. Most of the roofs are pretty thin, say 4 inches to 6 inches deep, although there's a so-called extensive version that can be much deeper than that, actually have shrubs in it and stuff. So here are some different versions. This is up here is a residential one on somebody's house. This one is sort of more of an example. We have some areas of the city that were rehabilitated. They were old brownfields, really high density housing put in. We've had a lot of increase in population. My parents live in one of these, and you can look down, and there are green roofs all over the place. And some of the, well, I'm thinking of a couple places actually. And the city rules, if you put in for high rises, you can build that high rise higher if you manage your runoff with green roofs. So there's an incentive that way. We got a lot of them at this point. It's not a race. We used to be proud of the fact that we had more than, say, Chicago, but doesn't really matter. Again, I guess we've got over 420 now, and you can see it really has happened just recently. We've had an eco-roof program where we have provided an incentive, and that ended. That was part of the Great Green program sponsored by the mayor with an injection of cash for these things. We provided people $5 per square foot of roof area that they manage. And that project just ended. It ended a little bit early because the politics changed. But it did result in a whole lot more of these green roofs getting built. And the whole idea was to build awareness and to build the professional community that designs and builds these things. And I think it achieved that as far as building the industry. This is the building that I work in, and there was a green roof installed as a retrofit, which is the most expensive. Unfortunately, the roof was redone after about 5 years, and part of this roof was destroyed. But that's what that's what it looked like when it went in. This is the south waterfront area. That's this brand new reclaimed area where a lot of the developers put in green roofs because of the incentives. Hamilton Apartments, which is one of the ones we've monitored. Another big public building, the Multnomah County building, where there's actually a courtyard here with a beautiful overlook towards the West Hills there. So this is a really deluxe version of a green roof. It's thicker. It actually has some contours in it, and it's got this beautiful overlook where people can come eat lunch there. So let me just check. Okay. This is perhaps the newest thing on the list that I have. It's a green wall, and whoops, sorry. I think it was a grant-funded project. We don't build a lot of these. I think if the stormwater management benefit is uncertain, but some folks got inspired, and people have been interested in green walls. So it's basically a series of troughs. The water comes off the roof and cascades down through these things. And this is the big launch of it. We had some politicians, and Portland loves to think of itself as being progressive and trying new ideas, and this fits right in. I'm not sure, again, how much we're going to see. These are quite expensive. I think it's perhaps more interesting than anything else. We have a few other green walls, but they're typically done more for aesthetic reasons. And they're really interesting. I mean, the technology, how they're done and put together, I think is interesting, and they can be quite attractive. This is at a hotel. There's actually a bar over here. There are people sitting and drinking in the summer evenings there. So again, we see some of that. So green streets.
We have a question.
Yeah.
Just going back to the roofs, do most of them have irrigation systems or not?
That's a good question. We would love to insist that they not have irrigation systems in terms of not requiring summer watering, but I think, in fact, most of them do. Most designers aren't willing to let their systems sit out there and fry for, say, an eight-week dry period. And I think there's a lot being learned, as is true for all this stuff, about what plants, native or not, we use what works. We used to always say native only, but it became clear early on that natives don't necessarily survive in any of this stuff. It's not these aren't natural settings. We use a lot of natives. Anyway, experimentation is huge, and that goes
What's
on.
most common species? Sedums that are used?
It is, yeah. And in fact, we have there's a lot of detail with that. We often use our latest version for the ones that we spec for the city of Portland. We actually have a rule. Our new pump stations all have green roofs, meaning I think 5 of them so far. And we use red lava rock, which we happen to have from the volcanoes nearby, with sedum. The sedum seem to love to colonize on these gravel layers on the roof. Okay, so shifting now, talking about these green systems in the street, I just want to give you a sense of the cross section. I'll do a little more of that. Curbs here, here's the street, and then here's the edge, say a planting strip here, and then, as I mentioned, we typically pond 6 to 9 inches of water on top of the surface here, and then we usually bring in 18 inches of modified sandy soil that has a lot of compost in it. And in this case, it's just sitting on top of the native soil. Most of the facilities we build don't have any gravel underneath them, although that's done in some cases where more capacity is needed. There might be an overflow pipe that stands here, and it might connect with a gravel layer that's down here. But we typically like to keep it as simple as possible in terms of complexity and cost. So this is the kind of cross section we have. This is where it all started on Siskiyou Street in 2002. We had a young landscape architect who had the right skills and the interest to design a pair of green streets. And here they are. These are bump outs, and they're the simplest kind of systems as far as pretty much the cross section that I just showed you. Water comes down the street, it goes through an inlet up here, travels through the system. There's, I think, 3 compartments in each case. There's a porous check dam that'll help slow the water down and back it up in each compartment. Then the water comes out this end. So, and it has a bit of a V shape, but most of the systems, if you're going to go to the time and trouble and expense to build these kinds of systems, we typically put in flat bottom facilities because we're always trying to capture as much of the storm peak as we can. We really don't do many V-shaped swales anymore for water quality. We're trying to impound, capture as much water as possible. So we do flat bottom versions of these today. Again, multiple compartments. So talking about the other benefits that come with them, here's a version that has an ADA crosswalk. This is an area that has a lot of traffic and just very poor crossings, and so we work with transportation, which isn't always easy. We're siloed. We're different parts of the city, but transportation immediately understood long ago that there were big pedestrian and bike safety improvements with these. So the water comes in I'm having trouble with it. Comes in at this end, fills this up, and then you see a trench drain here that goes into this part of it, and then out the other end. So this was an interesting project because we planted it a certain way, and it was one of our first projects, and the residents hated it. It's in an area where they hated the looks of it. They liked the function of it. They were fine with the function of it, but it was the looks. It's an area that has just a lot of immaculate lawns. There are parts of the city really varies as far as the aesthetic of the front yards. They hated this thing, and we ended up replanting it, which we absolutely don't do. but the residents wouldn't have it. Yeah.
Are your vegetation species different as they are going through their water path?
Not in the wetted part. This, I think, is a V-shaped system, one of our older ones as well. So you've got rushes and sedges in the bottom. And then we do have what we call the upland areas that have some plants that are better in the dry parts of the upper parts of the system. But the path of the water along the bottom here is all the same, rushes and sedges. We're very lucky to have, and perhaps it's the same for you, a great group of rushes and sedges that actually do really well. Some of these systems, depending on how well the underlying soil is drained, some of them will have standing water for a week or more during the winter with these low intensity storms we have. And then in the summer, again, we have this prolonged dry period.
On that kind of design, do you have any concerns or have had any issues with the edge? All a bike off or skateboard or along the sidewalk edge, looks like, I don't know, there's 6 inches or so.
You know, yeah, good question. We had, not on our green streets typically. I think it happens, but it has not been a huge issue. We've seen that on some private, like at schools, and we'll put some knobs on there. The landscape architects kind of figure it out. But interestingly, I don't know of a lot of green streets that where that's an issue. There is an issue. We put reflectors here, so traffic could be coming along this way. We put reflectors along here, and they often come off. You can see some yellow paint here, and that comes off. And we do have occasions when cars drive into our facility, which isn't so great. It definitely happens, and I think at one point early on, we were concerned about whether we get lawsuits, and it's an ongoing thing that cars end up in our facilities occasionally. That's a whole different part of the city that manages that. It's our risk group, and we're aware of this, but they've never pushed back and said, look, this is too much. I know that for Seattle, Washington, they have actually put markers, stand-up kind of reflective markers, because their legal units were so concerned about liability associated with people driving into these things. Yeah?
How supportive is the street maintenance crews of these streets? Will you not have lots more maintenance and cleaning out debris, shrubs,
Yeah, you bet.
Material? The learning curve, I'm sure, but...
Yes, and I have a whole section on that. So, sorry, I should move quicker. I'm belaboring this. Here's another version. We have various accommodations for cyclists. There's a lot of cycling in Portland. And so here's a case that worked with a green street and a cycle track that worked well. This is a pretty typical curb extension, one of the more recent ones. You can see incorporated into a small kind of suburban downtown area. Again, a lot of design work. Whoops. Another, I don't even know what to call this. It's some version of a bike lane that has a bump there, organizing traffic. Just another example of those two together. This is an industrial area on that inner east side. You can see downtown in the background there. And where we've had to work a lot with the truck community on the turning radiuses and various things to incorporate these in, and a lot of pedestrian improvements. This is an area that's getting encroached upon more and more by, it's an industrial area, but it's sort of going away, but we still have found ways to incorporate green infrastructure.
So you have a tree planted in that one?
Yeah.
Are we still using your 18-inch depth of soil?
We typically mound the soil in the vicinity of the trees so they can do better. But a lot of talk about that over the years. So again, on Clay Street, you can see that, this is a huge improvement. This is a bump out in the curb here that narrowed crossings in both directions. So the facility's behind the curb, but it's a bump out configuration. This is an example. This is the before picture. And then these are stormwater planters that we put in. These tend to work quite well. You can see there's a step-out zone here for the cars. These are really for an ultra-urban setting. This is Portland State University. It's top dollar as far as the expense. We don't do it a lot. Developers sometimes do this. It's a really attractive way to manage the stormwater requirements.
So are those infiltrating into the soil, or is there subsurface drainage tied into the storm sewer system?
No, these good question. They infiltrate into the soil, and water comes in. There's a trench drain at this end, comes in, and then the system overflows back out into the street, and then it does, so it's a sequence. We have a few planters with trees in them that are like some people may know the Filterra unit. And we don't build a Filterra unit. We actually use a regular soil in it, but we put trees, but there's some similarities. It's a box system.
So you make your own?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but again, it has our soil in it, so it drains much more. The Filterra drains at over 100 inches per hour, I think. So. And then here's a version of a street side planter. You can see there's a bunch of them here. I think there are 5 of them, and so it's works a little better with planting. Again, it's a landscape architect that just came up with this idea. And these are infiltration systems. I don't know how much of this we'll see. I don't remember the cost, in terms of cost effectiveness, how cost effective it is. Another version of a planter. And then this is a swale. We do build a few swales.
Is there subsurface drainage with the swale, or that's all infiltration?
It just depends on what the underlying soils do. If they don't,
Would you have some that have drainage?
we do. Yeah, and we even have some that have liners in them if we're on top of contaminated soil or high groundwater. That, of course, will have a drainage system at the bottom. We'd be using a plastic or an HDPE liner. As a utility, we really rather not build those. It's still a fairly new technology. You've got liner attachments up on the concrete walls. You've got an under drain, and our engineers are really concerned about what happens down the road 10, 20 years, the cost of replacing those and how they do. Anyway, go ahead.
Can you talk a bit about pre-treatment? What you guys do, if what works, what doesn't work?
As far as the water coming into these facilities?
Yeah.
There's it's a good question. It really varies, of course, depending on what kind of street you're working with as to how much sediment gets delivered into these things. And we've learned the hard way. You can see this entrance here. I think it's one of our older designs. There's typically a concrete pad at the entrance that's flat that allows sediment to accumulate, and workers can come in with a flat-edge shovel and scoop the stuff off of. And it's usually plants, these pretty rigid rushes that will limit the sediment from moving into the system. It is true that the sediment loads can be kind of hard to predict. If you're on a busy street, it's not, but sometimes we get a lot more sediment than we thought, and it's something we continue to fine-tune as far as what we do. Some of the bigger systems actually have a forebay. It's a compartment with a gate on it that'll fill up with sediment and then overflow to the next one. So just quickly, we have a lot of stormwater facilities on private property. This is just a download from our database, so it's not just green, it's, well, I guess this is all green actually, but we have a whole lot of soakage trenches and dry wells in the city of Portland, particularly on the east side, and they're still in use. I'm just highlighting the green infrastructure parts of it. Stormwater planters, again, this would be mostly used on private property, but sometimes in the streets. We get flat bottom facilities, so you're getting maximum utility as far as ponding water, 18 inches of growing medium, and then sometimes a gravel layer if you're trying to actually store water. And then a line system. This one actually has a concrete box it's in, but most importantly, it's showing here. You could do it next to a foundation, and it's got an overflow drain that comes in and a perforated pipe that's collecting water from the gravel layer. This is Portland. So this is some of the cooler green stormwater management design where it's been fitted in. This is just up the street in downtown Portland. There's our streetcar, and this is the same facility there that has a lot of interesting metal work with it. This is really the art part, I think, incorporated in a public plaza. These are other sections of it. They have trees in them. Here's another part of the campus, and these areas are kind of depressed relative to this surface that contributes water into it. I think one of the things to be skeptical about it always, I think, is knowing where the water is moving. getting it right topographically. I suspect that some of the water hits some of these units much harder than others. There are no runnels or trench grates bringing water in. It's a neat system, and I think it works fairly well for what it is. Trench drain connecting two parts of a swale system. Planters incorporated in an attractive way. Again, this is up at Portland State University. This is a trench drain bringing water from a building that's right to the right there. This is a stormwater retrofit that I worked on, and it's a sewer backup relief project. The school connects to the combined sewer system, and instead of digging up the sewer pipe in the street to fix the problem, which would have been a lot more expensive, we incorporated stormwater systems on site. This is what it looks like now. There's a large rain garden here. And then we put in this landscape. These are stormwater planters here that take runoff. And there's the rain garden itself up against the school. And the stars kind of aligned for this project as far as having enough real estate. This was a parking lot, and we were able to take this space and actually preserve most of the parking spaces for the school because the striping had been so inefficient. There was actually room to do this kind of stuff. Huge value to the school as far as the trees here providing shade for a southern exposure. So it was an amazing project to work on because all this stuff aligned itself and it worked out really well. We spent about $500,000 retrofitting the school, and there's more to it than what you've seen here. And again, that was substantially cheaper than digging up the public sewer in the street, replacing it. Whoops. I don't know where that's from. We'll just bypass that. This is another courtyard planter. And I'm going to show you some more private facilities. I think we've talked about most of this. This is our own water pollution control lab with some interesting art like, I forget what you call these things, that deliver water into basins. Boys and Girls Club with a landscape infiltration basin. We do some pavers, but we're really not a leader in this regard. We focused a lot on the green stormwater management. I think a lot of people would include pavers and pervious asphalt and things as a green infrastructure, but we actually the state of Washington has done a lot more on this, and I think we're going to do more in the past. It was kind of a policy decision. Our chief engineer, in terms of using pervious asphalt and concrete in the streets, our chief engineers were really hesitant to jump into the technology, and so we haven't done a lot of it. Same with rain harvesting. It's a great idea. It's a really interesting idea, and I don't know whether it works better for you guys, but given the way our storms come in, again, we have our summers can be 3 months without much rain, and so if people do stormwater and during 9 months of the year, you don't really need to harvest stormwater because we get plenty of rain. And so, but if you do harvest water, you pretty much use it up pretty quickly during the beginning of our dry season. So there's never been a real emphasis on rain harvesting. Some really high-end buildings use it for flushing toilets and such if there's a lot of traffic, but we just don't see a lot of that in Portland. Skate park with a landscape infiltration area. And then this is a grant project that has this funny, these barrels, a very whimsical project, and you can see, I don't know what the barrel's doing in there, but this is one of our green streets with stormwater coming in. And I have a couple slides where we're actually mixing public and private stormwater. So there's stormwater coming off the private property into the units. It's been a long time quest. There's a distinct boundary, as probably is the case for you guys, of public versus private stormwater and public versus private facilities. And I think we're going to see more over time where maybe there are more projects with green streets that take private water. It takes a lot of agreements with the property owner, but there are some real advantages to the idea. This is a case where this is another public entity, is Portland Community College. You can't see it, but the street is right over here. And this system is taking roof runoff. There's a downspout right there. Roof runoff and street runoff. Again, right now it's pretty complicated as far as the legal agreements. You've got long-term maintenance to address and who's going to fix it if there's an issue. But there's a lot of value to it. This is, I think, one of the neatest projects. I didn't work on it, but this was a public space in the junction of two streets. Picture doesn't show you everything. That was kind of an area where some bad things happen. It's nestled in the middle of a community. And so through an amazing effort, multiple city bureaus, parks and transportation and mine, environmental services, and some grant funds, input by the bike community, this was turned into a neat little pocket park. It's a real amenity for the neighborhood. I think it's going to be really rare that we have these opportunities, but it's just neat to show it. And it was just a labor of love by the people who worked on it, and a tremendous effort, but it has tremendous value in the community, and I wish we could do more of it. It wasn't cheap, but there's just real value to the community. It's a meeting place. Again, a lot of bike traffic coming through here. Portland's weather is so mild that I think that's one reason we have such a biking community. So quickly, the tree program. We do have a tree program, and these days it's funded both out of the city's general fund, but my bureau has also contributed money over time for stormwater management. There's been quite an effort to plant trees. So here's an example of one street that's gotten trees through the program. Meet the Tree program. So a lot of it's outreach. This is to plant street trees, but also on private property. The city has actually promoted tree planting on private property as a general good, but also for stormwater management. Even our models include some benefit provided by trees as far as stormwater management. Not to go into too much detail, but as part of the mayor's push, the goal was to plant 83,000 trees. The group actually got, I think it's gone up to almost 35,000. And a lot of the benefit, I think, was going door to door. We had canvassers going door to door, talking to people about the benefits of trees. I forgot to mention an important detail, which is in the city of Portland, the city doesn't own the street trees, the trees that are along the street. The property owners actually own those trees. And so it requires, if the city's going to plant a tree along the street, it actually requires a conversation and an agreement with the property owner. Is that the case in Iowa, that street trees are owned by the property owners? It's all the city?
Yeah.
So anyway, hence the extreme outreach that's gone on with this idea. So you can see some of that. We have 2 full-time staff, but a lot of seasonal staff. And this project continues even though the funding from the mayor has diminished substantially. And they're planting not just along streets, but they're planting open spaces. This is a junction with a major artery and some of the bigger open spaces. So lots of new trees in Portland. So you can see the thousands of trees that have been planted. Forgot to mention, tree bait is a small addition, but our stormwater and sewer utility will give you a rebate or reduction on that big bill that I showed you if you plant a tree. And it's depending on how big the tree is. So it's linked to the size of the canopy and the estimated future stormwater benefit that it's going to provide. And it's the black part of top part of the bars here, and it's almost a symbolic gesture, but it gets outreach people talking to residents about the benefits of trees and the fact that they can get a rate reduction. So it doesn't provide huge numbers as far as tree plantings, but it's considered to be an important program. Okay, so now for something completely different quickly, we do have floodplain projects, and our most famous one is this one in East Lents. And I imagine you guys do projects like this where you've got, this is a waterway, it's a creek in eastern Portland that the Army Corps of Engineers armored the creek, straightened it and armored it in the 20s. And that worked in many ways, but for decades and decades there's been flooding. And the city has actually had a program to get affected property owners out of the floodplain, to expand and kind of recontour the floodplains, to provide flood storage, but also provide better habitat for fish and benthic organisms. And it's been a project that's gone on over decades and decades. So this is one of our roads in Southeast that's right next to the creek. I think think you guys are famous for flooding, aren't you, in the last few years? What it used to be. So this is one of the areas would have gotten people out. And this is an example of the kind of project. I don't know if I have the stats here, but I think there was a willing seller program where the city actually bought out about 50 property owners. Over time, as they sold their houses, the city bought those properties and got them out. And then I think the city also acquired 80 parcels in order to clear out the floodplain. And so here's an example of recontouring and remeandering the stream, reconnecting it with its floodplain and all the benefits there. Again, it was the way it was just too expensive and too risky. But it did take decades. Here's one of the units. I don't know how many houses were in that parcel, but again, it's been recontoured and remeandered. And many of these are really neat open spaces where people can go and walk around. Here's another creek project. This is, we call it Headwaters. This is a redevelopment project. This is what it looks like today, or what's there today. This was a giant parking lot that sat on top of the headwaters of a creek that's somewhat sensitive as far as the, this creek has been listed for various things. And so all asphalt in this area. Here's a stream coming up through here. The creek has been daylighted, and there have been various stormwater management measures done associated with the buildings and the parking lots here. And then this is a public rain garden that's managed by us, by the city of Portland. And interestingly, this was all asphalt as well. The street was all asphalt. And one of our landscape designers went to our transportation division and said, hey, do we really need all this asphalt? It was sort of a big no man's land intersection. It was kind of dangerous because there was so much asphalt and not much direction for drivers. And in fact, our transportation bureau agreed that it would be safer to straighten the street. And so this was converted with the creek running through here and a rain garden that manages runoff from the street here. So this is one of the few daylighting projects we have, and daylighting is sort of the holy grail. The city would love to do more of this. Hugely expensive, but we had a developer who was well connected with city council, had a lot of great ideas, and was willing to do this, and got some. These are marketed as kind of environmentally friendly units. So here's what it looks like, and the creek runs right through here. And it runs through here and goes under the road and then comes out here. And here's the rain garden I talked about that's owned and maintained by my bureau. Oh, there's the creek. Here's what that space looks like with the creek between the buildings. So it's a really attractive thing. Lots of lessons learned about how to deal with the creek. I think they put a ton of gravel underneath the creek bed, so actually the creek, you can't see it sometimes a year. Again, lots of lessons to learn about how to do this stuff, particularly adjacent to buildings and the safety concerns with that. So here's one of the buildings with its nice stuff, and there's the rain garden. Has a fancy flume here that brings in runoff from the street and runs down into the rain garden. Okay, hopping again to yet another issue. I wanted to talk briefly about modeling and monitoring. So this is what, on our east side, standard view with a busy road and commercial properties, but then a large residential area attached to it. And I'm not a modeler, but we have a model now as of, 15 years ago. It's called an explicit model. It actually hooks up every single impervious area. It doesn't generalize or it doesn't generalize as far as taking a whole block and estimating percentages of impervious area. Every parking lot, every roof has a direct connection to the sewer system. So the quantity of water and the timing of the entry of that water into the sewer system is explicitly modeled. It took a huge effort to put the model in place, but it's really what is the underpinning for all these projects, because we can point to an existing parking lot and say we know exactly how much trouble the runoff is providing for our sewer system. So the model was a huge investment by the city. It was part of that CSO program that cost so much money. We have rain gauges all over the city that we use. These were our design storms. I realize it's metric, the graph, so anyway, you guys will laugh probably, but this is our big guy, our 25-year storm that we're have to protect residents from for sewer backups. And the peak 5-minute intensity is about 3 inches per hour for a brief period, and then the storm comes down. And this is a good insight into why our green streets, or those simple systems manage. We call them shock absorbers or bathtubs. It's all about whether those green streets, they pond to about 6 or 9 inches, can manage this peak right here. And they can overflow 10 to 15 minutes in, and that's okay because the surge will have already gone through the local sewer system. So that's the game we're playing as far as building a lot of these things. Protecting creeks is a whole different deal, but as I said, a lot of this started at Green Stormwater Management with protecting our sewer system. There's our CSO design storm, and here's our dinky water quality design storm. Again, modeling. This is a crazy map. It's showing the properties in red are the ones that are at risk of sewer backups, and then I think the purple sewer lines are the ones that are surcharging and the ones that we need to replace. We've got a very fancy modeling system that shows us where we need to manage runoff for the old combined sewer system. Here's our monitoring. We do, and I'm going to talk about it here, we do monitor these things. It's very expensive. We basically put ourselves in a position of having to do some monitoring to show that this stuff works. And it's been fun to work on that stuff. I sit next to the engineer who's in charge of this stuff. It's really fun to work on this stuff. It's also true that a lot of the places around the country, like Seattle, I think there's a hotbed in Wisconsin. Maryland is certainly a hotbed for bioretention and green infrastructure. We see consortiums of academia, the federal government, local government, and other partners. We've sort of been all alone, and it takes some big bucks to do this kind of research. So we pay a lot of attention to Washington State. They have a stormwater research center. The state of Washington has provided substantial sums of money to Washington State to do related research. So we've done some of the homework that we absolutely had to do because we were doing some of this stuff first. But I don't know if you guys, maybe ISU is the leader for you guys. But we definitely turn to other organizations for help. So one of the things we do, we sometimes open up, we do less of this now, but we'll open up a hydrant and actually mimic a storm because it's so hard to make sense when a real storm is going. So here's a green street here that's getting dosed with water, and we're producing a hydrograph and watching the outflows from it. Here's a green roof with a monitoring system. We're monitoring outflows. Here's someone down in a sewer manhole installing a continuous monitoring system, which is really the most expensive, to put a meter in a sewer line. I think we spend about $8,000 a year for that, to meter outflows. And this is a big rain garden that we're monitoring in one of those synthetic storms. Again, one of our flow tests on the right. And then we have done some soil testing. These imported soils are so important in so many ways to the functioning of these facilities. One of the big issues, of course, is how fast they infiltrate. Sometimes it's your underlying native soils that are governing the infiltration rate. But we continue to do soil tests. Again, our soil is, it's about 30% yard debris compost. We have a lot of yard debris because it's so wet in Portland. There's a steady supply of yard debris compost. Is fairly low in nutrients. There's some nutrients. The soil mix is a third that by volume, and then about 2/3 sand. We have plenty of dredge sand from our rivers. And then about 10% fines, so a touch of real soil. And lots of ongoing research for us and in Washington State about these soils. There's some, I could go on forever about this, there's some concern about export of nutrients, because they do export nutrients. And also those infiltration rates. We found that our imported soil drains much faster than the 2 inches per hour than we've assumed. Often it's tens of inches per hour, even after years in place. I think for our ground level green infrastructure that infiltrates, early concerns were with clogging, and we really haven't seen a lot of that, which is kind of amazing. I think it was years ago, people who we talked to, I think most of the comments were related to sand filters, and these systems were considered most related to sand filters, and they were concerned about clogging. We haven't seen that very much. I think one of our concerns is actually infiltration that's too high, or much higher than the original design. So there's the rain garden and some of the data that's come out. So here are the storms up here, graphed on this right axis in millimeters, and then these are discharges coming out of the bottom, the volume per second coming out. So about a half a foot per second. So the facility was built here. Here's the over time. It was built, it was finished in November 2003, and you can see these exceedances. These were storms that were putting houses downstream at risk of sewer backups. Then the thing was built, and mostly we've been on track. We've been meeting the design standard. We did just have to clean this out. The forebay had to be cleaned out just a couple of years ago because of debris in it. Here's another thing. You can see the peaks of the storm coming through in the lighter color, and then this is the actual discharge. This is before the facility was built. You can see how much smaller the peaks are, and we've documented a volume reduction of 86%. That's great. So that's 86% over the course of a year, and that means this is not going into our combined sewer system. We don't have to pump or treat it. This facility was actually built to manage the peaks of storms and protect people from sewer backups, but it's also giving us this benefit of keeping this water out of the sewer system full time. We've done monitoring of, we call them eco roofs often, trying to convert to green roofs, but eco roofs is what we call green roofs in Portland, and this is one of our test setups. And more of the same stuff. You can see just a dramatic reduction. It's remarkable how much our green roofs have been shown to flatten the peaks of storm. Again, in light color, the actual rainfall, and then metered runoff. They aren't as good at volume reduction, but I think it varies enormously year to year and season to season depending on the timing of the rainfall and the temperatures. So it can really vary year to year how well they perform as far as the retention that they provide. Okay, operations and maintenance, we're finally there. We actually have a division of our organization. It's not in parks or somewhere else. It's part of our sewer and stormwater utility. Their job is nothing but to go out and maintain facilities. And I just got this slide set from them. They get asked all the time what it costs them to maintain our green facilities. They get asked by people all over the country. Everybody wants to know. They have a lot of green streets, and they also have a number of regional stormwater facilities that are kind of natural areas. This one looks just like a parcel in a development of some sort. So for the regional stormwater facilities, not the green streets, here's what they gave me. Looks like they check on them a couple of times a year. They do maintenance 1 to 3 times a year. They do what you would expect them to do, controlling invasives, cleaning forebays and inlets, tracking debris, erosion control. And they do have some structural things, some walls and fences to repair. So they have 135 sites, total of 130 acres, and they are about $2,000 per acre managed. And they do have some of our staff that are helping do the maintenance. A lot of it's by contractors, which is true of the green streets as well. So it's very cost favorable to be using contractors, and we let a lot of contracts for this kind of work. Here's, I'm going to talk about the maintenance of the green streets, but you can see how significant the budget is for this work group. It's called the Revegetation Program, and it actually came out. It was the group that was charged with revegetating riparian corridors in the city, and then they branched out to do other things. We've had an increase in regional facilities, but a lot of this increase is attributable to the number of green streets that we have. And so here we are, right here. They've got an operating, again, scarce operating dollars. It's about $1 million a year spent on maintaining these green systems. So the city is making a really significant investment in this, and the head of the management group who works down the hall from me is you can imagine this is relatively new to his portfolio. He's in charge of all the maintenance for our network of pipes and pump stations and everything else. And this green thing is a new part of his portfolio and a real question mark. So a lot of questions for everybody about what maintaining this stuff is costing. Before I forget, so we have a central database that has all of our gray assets in it, and all of these green assets, and key to the whole idea, all these green assets are also being managed into this database now, which is a huge amount of effort, but essential to any discussion of managing these as assets. And then even getting them into the database is years in the making. It's taking a long time to do. And there are lots of questions about what you put in that database. What is it that you monitor? Obviously, you're monitoring the number of visits per year, the kind of work that's done, but what do you put in the database as far as the infrastructure itself? You want to know what, for instance, for the green streets, you want to know whether it has sub-drains. You want to know if it has trees in it. Does it have check dams? We had a lot of conversations about how to adequately document, for database purposes, these new green assets. So this is just about the fact that there's a big database that the data is being put in. And the fact we've invested a lot in producing a database that's easy for the staff to interface with in the field. We actually pulled this idea of a level of service from Seattle. And this basically is the definition of the level of service that we're trying to provide for green streets. When the public asks, when we get people calling in and saying, that green street, it looks like junk. You guys are never out here. You want to be able to tell them what the goal is and what you're doing. Often they weren't there, but actually city workers were there. But we have a written description of what it is we do, and that's something we can show the public. So obviously we're not providing an A level of service. The facility would look better if we were doing that. But we're also not doing a C or a D. And this is our current level of service. And interestingly, it's been our level of service for a few years, and the head of our maintenance group is not going to change it until he gets data from our new database that actually confirms, given our current level of effort, whether we're meeting that standard or not. Again, we're in an asset management mode. So, here's our level of service B. So we keep the inlets mostly clear. This is obviously a case where water is probably not even going in the facility. It wouldn't meet level B. Pretty healthy cover, not total coverage. You can see some bare spots, but looks pretty good. This is a real stinker, and hopefully we don't see this in very many cases. And that's the case. We don't see many cases like this, where it's completely covered over with sediment in this case. And then we have more sediment here. We're asking, I think we've made changes over time to try to trap this kind of a sediment on a concrete pad at the entrance. And then here's another case where we've got sediment coming into the facility. And I think we're all waiting. We all have experience with green assets or green infrastructure as far as visiting these facilities, seeing some things like this, but we're all waiting for the big download from that new database after, and it might be in a year or so. They will have spent years setting up that database and collecting data, and then they can run those queries and see whether it's, we've got disproportionate charges coming from certain facilities or certain kinds of facilities. Are 50% of our maintenance dollars for green streets coming from, say, 25% of the facilities, and what about that? These data systems are just essential once you get enough of this stuff in the ground. So as far as green streets, the maintenance that we do there, we do have staff that are out there mostly doing inspections and writing the maintenance work orders. They're stopping by, looking in on the facility. They inspect contractor work. Our staff are also entering maintenance costs into the database. Oh, and importantly, our staff are also, of course, the ones who are responding to public inquiries that come in, talking to property owners next to them and to the facilities if need be. Contractors do most of the work. itself. So an important distinction between what's done in the first 2 years before long-term maintenance. 2 years of so-called startup or warranty maintenance is part of capital construction work. For 2 years after construction, the plantings get watered, and that's the most important element of the whole thing. And then, as well as weeding as is needed. We typically plant, at least the green streets that we build. Private developers also build green streets, but we typically use gallon plants in these facilities, planted about 12 or 18 inches on center. So we get, it's kind of an instant landscape, and it's expensive. The public likes it. Most importantly, it reduces the maintenance costs initially because we get much more cover more quickly. We have to push on developers with that because they want to plant smaller plants for good reason. But again, we find reduced maintenance costs. Irrigation, I can't emphasize that enough because we have this summer drought period, and we definitely will lose plants if we aren't irrigating about every 2 weeks during July and August. So this is about long-term maintenance. After the 2-year mark, all of these facilities, whether they were built by a private developer or by us, they're put into the long-term maintenance program. And that's where this database that we're building really comes in. Again, these facilities are typically visited 3 or 4 times a year for maintenance activities. Again, on a regular basis, people are cleaning out the inlets, removing leaf and trash, doing weeding, periodically doing some pruning. Unfortunately, we do have some facilities in the long-term maintenance program. Last summer, we had a really long, hot, dry summer, and we had to run out and irrigate some facilities. And I don't know what percentage it was, but much better to irrigate than to lose the plants. That would be a much more expensive proposition. We do very little replanting. It's horrendously expensive. And we do get some structural damage, say damage to check dams and walls, but that hasn't been significant to date. So here's the expensive watering that goes on during the warranty period, actually hiring someone to come out with a truck. And our negotiations with the contractors becomes really important. Watering can really add up as far as the expense. Here's one of the crews doing standard maintenance, cleaning one of the inlets, and then they're in the facility, and here they are hauling the stuff away. So here are some of the costs. During the first couple of years, the maintenance costs, largely because of the irrigation, is more expensive, $3 to $4 per square foot of facility. And then in the long term, it's more like $1.55 per square foot. And again, these numbers will be adjusted over time as the database gets bigger and better. It's not cheap, and I think there's much more. Our chief engineer has really put the clamps. We don't do any Green Streets facilities now if we don't absolutely need them for stormwater management. I think initially there was sort of a political push, and people really like Green Streets. We really clamped down just because of the long-term maintenance liability that comes with these things. Green Street Steward Program, I think Pam, you asked me to talk about this. This is really an effort. It may, in the long term, we're trying to get residents involved in helping us do some of the basic maintenance work on Green Streets. And it may, in the long term, help reduce maintenance costs, but it's really a pilot project. And more than anything, the intent was to get neighbors involved with their Green Streets to make them aware of them. So we actually had a few people that have spent part of their time developing outreach materials and going out and working with people. It's recruiting not just people who live next to the Green Streets to do things like trash removal, but businesses and nonprofits have gotten involved. So just in 2010, there was a 6-month pilot, and then in 2012, it began a citywide effort. I guess the relevant number is that about 20% of our Green Streets have formally been adopted by residents or businesses or nonprofits. And again, we don't know how much maintenance advantage it's providing. Hopefully someday we'll find that it actually is helping reduce our maintenance costs, but that wasn't the starting place for us, really. Here's some of the folks involved. I think most importantly, we're not asking them to prune or trim. We found out the hard way that if you get people to help you, sometimes they end up pulling out plants that you actually are desirable, doing things you don't want. We don't ask them to plant things. We end up with tomato plants in our facilities. We do that. Or plants that just don't belong there. And then removing sediment is we had to talk to our city attorneys about that, big questions about. Although the sediment could be removed and probably go to a Subtitled D facility or go to just a regular municipal dump, that we didn't want people handling the sediment, although we, a big sort of controversy about this. Ultimately we said, no, we have to take responsibility for the sediment, and that makes sense. Sediment that comes out of these facilities goes up to our treatment plant, to a dewatering pad, like any other material we remove from a stormwater inlet or a sedimentation system. We asked them not to do that. But there's still plenty of stuff to do as far as picking up trash. I guess we do allow them to pull some of these. And we have a database. People sign up and they're online, and there's various ways that we acknowledge their work. Interestingly, the most active nonprofit group is a group of surfers, of all people, who get out there with groups of, they're all young people, get out there and have big weekends and clean green streets. Obviously, we give them safety vests. We don't want them hurt. Some examples. So I wouldn't characterize it as a huge effort. Nonetheless, it's useful in a number of ways. I think we covered most of that. So into the future, I'm getting to the last parts of things. So Pam asked, well, where are you going to go from here? And I'll make this quick. I think we've realized that we can incorporate, and again, I've worked mostly on the ground with ground level facilities on stormwater infiltration facilities on private and public property. I think we've shown that you can incorporate these into the urban environment with good design. Again, it's not just the engineers, these are work teams that have stormwater landscape designers, typically landscape architects, along with engineers and geotechs and all that. I forgot to mention that in the urban environment, underground utilities are a huge constraint. Spent a lot of time working with utilities. Where's the gas line? Where's the water main? All that kind of stuff. And it's a big constraint in terms of cost, where you can do these things. But anyway, there is, I think in the future, we're still committed to this whole idea. There's the idea of creating green corridors, a couple of miles of, say, an important street that is connected by the green streets that have been, the green areas that have been put in along the street's edge, including green streets. Connecting schools with parks, pedestrian corridors that include green areas. Our system planning, the sewers plan and the stormwater plan used to be separate, and there's a real effort to put those things together, which sounds simple, but it's not. And so the green infrastructure would be right in there as far as planning, along with the gray infrastructure. Here's an example of a corridor where we've already kind of put all this stuff together, and it's underway. It's that Inner East Side industrial area. An artistic rendering. And you saw a picture of this, but this gives a good sense again about how meeting multiple benefits with these kinds of facilities. Here's a private property facility. This is a swale on a commercial property. Again, combining private and public, doing more of that. People are also pointing to this stuff for planning for climate change, and I'm not really close to that stuff, but it's part of the whole idea of being resilient to shifts in temperature and rainfall regimes. There's a talk about eco-districts. Again, we've had these areas within the city that have completely redeveloped. I'm talking about multi-block areas, and they're developed sometimes with themes, eco-themes, and just from the get-go, the developers often want to incorporate green roofs, and sometimes we're pushing really hard on them because we have a sewer system that has trouble managing all the new runoff that's going to be coming from it. I think we're going to see more of this stuff in our separated areas, protecting creeks as well. But it is true, we did, more than 5 years ago, we had a plan to put in some green streets in an area served by creeks, suburban area near where I live, and we had a rejection from the property owners. They didn't want green streets. And one of the pivotal issues is that they had a point. They said, look, you're going to put in 10 of these green streets on this street, but isn't it true that the catchment area that drains to this creek and is causing problems as far as nutrients and sediment, isn't it like 10 times larger than the area you're managing? We had to say yes. It was true. The incremental nature of this whole thing, the residents kind of understood that, and it was a suburban setting, and they really didn't want these things as far as they looked. And I'm talking about green streets. And we backed out of that. We didn't do the project. And so this kind of piecemeal approach in watershed areas served by creeks with separated stormwater systems is still a kind of a question mark. And we don't have the same dollars driving those projects as we did for the combined sewer project. I think we will see more of that. But I want to talk about design issues. I just said we've learned a whole lot about design issues, and there's so many design issues with incorporating particularly the surface level systems. But they go on. We're still refining our sediment collection systems at the front end of facilities, those 4 bays. Continue to work on those. Where do you put inlets? Continue to talk to the Fire Bureau about what about fire access adjacent to these things. Water lines cost us a whole lot of money. I just spent $16,000 to our Water Bureau. They love having the revenue to move a water line so we could put it into Green Street. Ouch, that hurts. We can't do very much of that. So there's still lots of things to learn. Still learning about street trees. We actually have a database of the trees we've put into these Green Street facilities. That really hasn't been done before. And so we're having to, again, put together a database and look at these trees over time and see how they do. They're being inundated with water on a regular basis. We think we've got it right, but it's a big deal. We're putting in, these trees that are in our green streets, those belong to us. They don't belong to the residents. They're outside the curb. They're not in the planting strip. Those belong to our utility, and so there are really big ramifications to how well that those do over time. So this was just some funny stuff. Portland, someone horsing around, and then horsing around here, I guess. Portland has old horse rings that we insist on reinstalling to recall our history, I guess. I was going to talk a little bit about soils, but we're at 9:30, and maybe I should just go to questions.
What would you guys like to do? Hear about the soils? Okay.
So, okay.
I
Guys,
have
really?
a question.
Yeah.
Before you were talking about a lot of different things, and I know Portland is pretty big on permaculture. Have you ever incorporated permaculture with any of your urban designs, or has that been asked by the city, or would you even consider it?
Well, so remind me what permaculture is, so I don't embarrass myself.
It's basically incorporating plants that you can harvest and use and eat in with designs.
Oh, I see.
And so there's different communities within Portland that have started incorporating this into their landscapes.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering if maybe it's too in the future for the city, but.
You know, it might be. I don't think it would happen in our green streets or any facilities that are taking runoff from the surface,
Okay.
from parking lots, because it's just too polluted. But I think for roof runoff, there are probably people that are doing it. You know, roof runoff is generally clean enough to do that.
So you haven't seen any of the wall type vegetation incorporating?
Not for harvesting.
Okay.
No. Yeah, interesting question. We did have we've had various groups ask about using mushrooms, fungi, I guess is how you pronounce it, in our green streets. And it's a really interesting thing, but we don't know how to even test it. And again, testing is really expensive, but there's this whole movement of remediation with mushrooms or fungi, and we're not sure what to do with that. We'd love, I mean, it might be a great idea, but we don't even know how to get our arms around it. The research would probably have to be done by academia in that case.
One more before you get soil.
Yeah.
In your suburban areas, you said there's pushback for kind of Green Street, or at least in the one what other techniques have been useful in your suburban site?
You know, so I'm thinking of suburban separated areas where you've got a creek running through and the streets just drain right into the creek. And I think that's a really tough question, and we've paid a whole lot of attention to the east side. The west side where there are hills is suburban, I'm thinking of that. And we typically, there are regional facilities, there are empty parcels or just areas that didn't get developed along the creek where the stormwater goes into. They're really challenging. We haven't done a whole lot of, put in a whole lot of proprietary systems, filters or filteras, but we have creeks that are listed for, say, phosphorus. And I'm thinking one near my house, there's a 2-lane, almost a highway, not a lot of room to put things, and we may end up putting in some what we call black box proprietary systems because we have to do something. So it's a real mixed bag, and I think we're going to be looking at that a lot more closely.
Check back 10 years?
Yeah. Because we're getting a lot more, again, a lot of our effort has been focused on protecting the sewer system. And you know, in some cases we've got parcels to take stormwater to landscape areas before it goes into the creek, but in many cases we don't. It goes right in. Well, soils, this happens to be something I've worked on a lot. This is, again, I'm amazed how much the soils vary around the country as far as what people have available. I think you guys have good soils, don't you? Relatively, that infiltrate pretty well. I was talking to somebody from San Diego. They got nothing to make these kinds of soils from.
Well, we do rely on bioretention a lot. We call it bioretention subsurface drainage, but we do have relatively healthy soils.
Yeah, great. So this would be a yard where our soil blend, this sandy soil mixed with compost is made. So we're rich in organic, but you know, it would be the sand, and then the compost would be one of these, and the soil would be one, and then I think this is the final blend probably here, that is the mix. And I think we found out, it was 2008 when we actually produced a real soil spec. Before that, it had been like a 3-line thing that just said it'll be a blend of sand, soil, and compost. There was no detail to it, and no attention paid to mixing, and we would get some really weird stuff like this. And we learned the hard way that we needed a better spec. We also learned the hard way, this is actually an infiltration facility, and it's a classic thing. I think everybody has to learn this the hard way, and we're not clear of this completely yet, but these things this is a development, infill, and of course the public infrastructure gets put in place first before the construction. And we're much better about it now, but obviously this Green Street, which hasn't been planted yet, wasn't adequately protected. You try to keep stormwater out of it. There's a lot of importance attached to erosion control. These things can get, you put that sandy soil material in, and they can get silted over. And you might have to go back and sealed up, and the infiltration might stop before you even plant the thing. You might have to go in and skim that whole layer off. Real trouble with developers if they're the ones who built it. And it's taken years and years of working with developers to try to get a better understanding of why they need to do this. And the economy is going again. We're going to see a lot more of these built by developers, and they take a lot of attention from our staff working with those developers. So we make sure that at the end of the 2-year warranty period, that startup period, that our maintenance people take into the city's possession a facility that is in really good shape. The plants are healthy, the plants have been watered, the system infiltrates well. Anyway, that's a whole topic. I forgot I threw this in, just this is sort of the very end of the presentation, if I had time kind of thing. This is what construction looks like for a green street. It's a little odd. That's a porous pavement system on the right, one of the few that we actually have, but I thought you might be interested in just seeing what the formwork looks like. And what typically happens, they put in the formwork, pour the walls, they've tromped on the soil in the middle, and this is going to be an infiltration facility. So they pour the walls, take the forms off the wall, and only then they dig down to the final excavated elevation of the facility and kind of fluff that soil up. Because we found out the hard way, if your initial excavation goes to the final depth of the thing, you really hammer those soils, and it's not going to infiltrate very well, even if you bring in a layer of sandy soil on top of that. a lot of work with the contracting community to get them to understand that. Whoops, I guess that's the end of it.
We're about 9:39, so maybe we'll just open it up. Questions?
Do you regulate every development no matter what the area is, or do you have a minimum area?
Yeah, we do. I think we have one of the most conservative trigger areas. It's 500 square feet of new or redeveloped area. And that applies to our city bureaus as well if the water bureau goes out and digs a water line. I think in Seattle, it's 5,000 square feet. We're really conservative. And it's a significant issue. Yeah.
You talk about monitoring or what you have learned with respect to the filtration on the impact on the structures of the streets and areas where you have political systems?
Yeah, I think the story's pretty short. I think that there was concern by the chief engineer in the Water Bureau early on about undermining or adversely affecting the subgrade for streets. And there was a little bit of testing done early on to look at moisture levels under the streets adjacent to Green Street's facilities. And ultimately, the decision was made. There's no additional monitoring being done. We do put a liner on the street side. I didn't show that. So it's a partial liner. It's basically a curtain. It'd be a plastic, a heavy-duty HDPE liner. And it goes, if this is the wall of the facility, well, I guess I could just do it here. It's attached to the curb, bolted to the curb, and then it comes down here and goes down into the native soil. That's where we've ended up on that issue, and I haven't heard anything about it since. So I think the presumption is it's not going to cause much damage to the streets. I think I know we do talk sometimes about it's unclear how much water actually would move up or around under that curtain. There's potential for that if you've got standing water in the facility, but again, no monitoring that I'm aware of. Get on that.
Is the curtain more of a feel-good, or is it truly believed to, was it to satisfy the chief engineer or whoever the skeptics were, or is there true belief that there is migration, water migration?
I'm not sure. I think everybody thinks that it is effective to a certain extent at keeping water from migrating. And of course, it depends on what the underlying soils are like, how saturated that layer is, how much head there is pushing down on it and pushing it out. I think everybody agrees it's somewhat effective, but it's not a guarantee. But we put in over 1,500 of these things as far as those green streets, and the chief engineers seem to be okay with it. So, yeah.
Do you do water quality testing before and after any of your practices that you install?
Boy, that's a great question. We have done, and it's really hard to characterize. Maybe you're a stormwater person, and to really get a handle on the mass balance with pollutants, the kind of continuous monitoring you need to do. You have first flushes moving through the system and such, but we have new incentives. There was a famous case in Washington State a couple of years ago outside of Seattle in a community called Redmond, and the state of Washington had worked with the community to do a lot of monitoring of Green Street's facilities, and these ones have under drains. They're not, like a lot of ours just overflow back out into the streets. These have under drains, and they found significant levels of nutrients, in copper. And that's a real no-no in Washington because of the salmon. The salmon are really sensitive to copper. So all of a sudden, the state of Washington gave a research group $300,000 to do what you're talking about. And we're paying a lot of attention. We don't have the resources to do that kind of research, but it would definitely apply to our facilities to the extent that we have facilities that discharge through under drains to a sensitive water body. So
Your focus is more on the quantity, not really the
it has been, but I think we're going to be shifting to more true watershed projects protecting creeks and streams. For the CSO program, it was all about quantity. And if for infiltration facilities, we don't really worry about water quality. We know that our compost-rich soil is soaking up a lot of the pollutants. And then it goes into the ground. And there's plenty of distance between to groundwater. So, but I think a lot of, years ago I was at a conference on the East Coast, and somebody from Washington, D.C. got a hold of me and said, "What are you guys doing using all that compost in your soil?" And I said, "Well, we got to have it. It's got a certain cation exchange capacity. It's a sponge. It holds on to water, and our plants desperately in the sandy soil need water during the summer." So it wasn't a surprise that we would get hit by this eventually someday. We've just had a lot fewer waterways that have limitations on things like phosphorus. But it's finally happening. I wouldn't be surprised if we reduce the amount of compost that goes into the soils. I wouldn't be surprised if on top of native soils that drain well and are relatively healthy. And our east side, actually, the soils are really quite good. And we've had people say, "Why are you digging up all this good soil and hauling it away?" We say, "Well, we want to be sure, bring in 18 inches of soil because we want to be sure that, that sponge is as thick as possible." But it's true, it costs a lot of money to haul it all away. Anyway, I wouldn't be surprised if we bring in less soil. Maybe we bring in 6 inches or a foot. And we make sure that we fracture the underlying native soil so that the imported stuff kind of works its way down in there. It's going to be less expensive, and we're going to, it could be less challenges. Now, if we have a flow-through system, what we call a flow-through system with under drains, it's different. The plants only have access to that soil, obviously. There's no connection to the natives. And I think there'll be some changes. We have some experiments going on with the addition of char and with iron metal filings to reduce copper and phosphorus export. And we're doing a small amount of that. The state of Washington is doing more. So, yeah.
Have other communities in the metro area kind of followed suit, or is Portland kind of out in front of everybody else?
We're way in front of everybody else on this stuff. Again, I think because of that combined sewer overflow program, and other jurisdictions are doing stuff. It really varies. In Washington County, I think that they don't do as many green streets. I think they're concerned about long-term maintenance costs. But then we have to our east, towards Mount Hood, there's a community called Gresham, and I think that they're actually doing more there. It's complicated. I think we're all very wary of the long-term maintenance costs. Green streets are much cheaper to build in the short term than, say, pipes. But then you have this long-term legacy as far as the maintenance, and we're still waiting for the verdict on how much maintenance there is associated with them. So it really varies.
It seems to me the combination of permeable pavements, which I think is a lot easier to maintain in the long term, combination of that and green infrastructure, other green infrastructure, green street features would be a good compromise.
And it is. In fact, I just have a project being built this summer that has pervious asphalt. And again, we don't have a ton of experience with these technologies, but for various reasons, it's a good option. The asphalt is actually a standard spec. In our standard spec, it's really not a big deal. We've had trouble recently with pervious concrete. And these are our transportation engineers who are out there working with this stuff in this case. And the concern with pervious asphalt is clogging. And I think that the head of our transportation bureau has just said, we can't do this, they're going to clog. Well, we have a few installations that are old, and the infiltration rates have dramatically fallen. And we get a lot of moss, given how gray and wet stuff is and warm, I guess. But they haven't clogged. These old systems haven't been, we've vacuumed them a few times. But they're still functioning adequately for our design storms, which is interesting. And there's also news from Bill Hunt in North Carolina. I don't know how many of you know him. That if you pay the big bucks, there are suction vacuuming systems that can get these systems back to the almost original infiltration rate. I think these are really high-tech units that are used at airports, but it's not inconceivable that a city might eventually be able to hire once every 5 years, every 10 years, to come out and get that thing back to what it was. Anyway.
And with that, we better finish up so we can get you to the next session. But Henry will be here for the majority of the conference, so if you see him around, ask him additional questions. I have his contact information as well. So I want to give you, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.